Today I'm going to be going over the last leg of Oswald's trip, allegedly, to the Soviet Union. And I put this map together to illustrate this. This may seem arcane to some people, I'm sure it does, but I think it's important. But anyway, the last part of his trip, according to the official story, is that he took a flight from London to Helsinki. Now, there was apparently no flight directly from London to Helsinki, and they don't have the proof that he did this, but in order for his times to work out, he would have to have taken a flight to Stockholm first, which is why I drew it the way I did here. And then there's two flights that he could have taken to Stockholm, or maybe from Stockholm. I forget the details now. But there were two flights. It could have been one or the other, where he could have done it this way. He flew from London to Stockholm, then to Helsinki, and then he got his visa, and 5 days later took a train to Moscow. That's how the official story seems to stand, even though it's a little bit ambiguous. And also, you'll notice on this map that I have a crude orange line drawn in there, which indicates a contradiction to this official story, and I'll get to that. But that orange line goes from Helsinki back to Stockholm, and then from Stockholm to the Soviet Union. This is one version of the story, that he returned from Helsinki to Stockholm, and then from Stockholm went to the Soviet Union. And the official story rests mostly upon this CIA document and other similar CIA documents that say the same thing. 10 to 15 October 1959, according to a very reliable but extremely sensitive source, Oswald stayed at the Torni Hotel in Helsinki from 10 to 11 October and then moved to the Klauskirke Hotel, where he stayed until 15th October, apparently waiting for a visa to be issued him by the Soviet consulate in Helsinki. He traveled to the USSR by train, crossing at on October 15th. So he got to the Soviet Union on October 15th, and that's the official story. So I've summarized that here. October 9th, Oswald arrives in the UK. October 10th, he leaves London for Helsinki. They don't specify exactly how he got there. The 10th and 11th, he stays at the Torni Hotel. 12th through 15th, they don't say that explicitly, but that's what you must assume from what they say. He stayed at the Klauskirke Hotel, Helsinki. And then October 15th, he enters Venekala. Apparently that's the word I had trouble pronouncing just a minute ago. On a train from Helsinki. Very straightforward and without complications. But the CIA was also considering this information. This is from a CIA document. Stockholm newspaper, Dagens Nyheter, of 25 November 1963 states Lee Oswald passed through Sweden during October 1959. This is one of the reasons to think he flew to Sweden first. Article also adds that Oswald was unsuccessful in obtaining visa to the USSR in Helsinki, which is where he went afterwards in Finland, which resulted in his returning to Stockholm. And this is the orange arrows I pointed out on my map. 2 days after he arrived in Stockholm, Oswald traveled directly to Moscow. This is not the story, the official story. This is Oswald going to Moscow from Stockholm. Concluding sentence of article states that this indicates that the Russian embassy, Stockholm, gave him a visa. Now, as for that situation, apparently there still is no evidence of where Oswald got his visa, whether it was Stockholm or Helsinki. One might wonder why that doesn't exist on the public record. According to a reliable source, and this is a CIA source now they're talking about, not the newspaper story, there was no record that there was any request for a USSR visa processed through normal channels for Oswald at any time during 1959, and they mean in they're talking about Sweden here, but as far as I can determine, there's no record of it even from Finland. And then they talk about how quickly he got his visa, and I'm not going to get into the details of that. So this Finnish newspaper story, Finnish? No, that was a Swedish newspaper story, presents a contradiction. That is, instead of Oswald going to Finland and then going to the Soviet Union, this has him go to Finland, but then return to Sweden, and then from there go to the Soviet Union. So now I think that Oswald did not go to the Soviet Union, that an imposter did, and I think what this points out, what this indicates, is that the switch was made in Helsinki. That is, that Oswald was intercepted in Helsinki, and that Oswald was sent back to Stockholm, but the impersonator stayed in Helsinki and went on to Moscow. And I find more support for this notion of mine in Oswald's hotel history in Helsinki. When he arrived at the Torni Hotel, the Hotel Torni, he wrote down, apparently, on this form that you had to fill out whatever hotel you went to in Finland. They had the same form you fill out. And he said his intent was to stay at this hotel for 5 days. But as we have already noted, he did not stay at the Hotel Torni for 5 days. He stayed there 2 days. And then on the 12th, he changed hotels. He went to the Klaus Kirke Hotel and stayed there until he left for Moscow. But this could make sense with the newspaper story. If Oswald had been intercepted in Helsinki after 2 days, he might have been sent back to Stockholm, and that's why the newspaper story reports that he returned to Stockholm, and he stayed there until he entered the Soviet Union. But they don't have direct evidence of his transit from Stockholm to Moscow. That's probably just an assumption they made based upon the facts they had, and I think one of those facts they had was that Oswald did indeed return to Stockholm. This is why he, contrary to his plans, did not stay 5 days at the Hotel Torni. He went back to Stockholm, I believe, and that's why it's consistent, and that would be consistent with this newspaper story. Now you might say, well, newspapers famously get things wrong all the time, and that would be true, but this is something the CIA was still taking seriously in July 1964, so the CIA must have found this newspaper story's details to be credible, and I think it makes sense with Oswald's hotel stay. Now, official storytellers will object to this sort of thinking I'm presenting, because I say the CIA is behind the assassination, is behind manipulating Oswald. So why am I crediting the CIA taking this story seriously? Well, I think it's pretty clear, and it makes sense, that the CIA plotters in the CIA want to keep their secrets even from the rest of the CIA. They keep everything on a need-to-know basis. So the people investigating Oswald's movements on the way to the Soviet Union in Sweden and Finland aren't necessarily going to know that he was intercepted by the CIA. The left hand does not always know what the right hand is doing. So I think it is legitimate to take CIA investigation on this issue seriously, even though the CIA in another part of the CIA is behind the plot. So this is my reconciliation of the evidence, the official story and this additional newspaper story. On October 10th, Oswald flies from London to Stockholm, then from Stockholm to Helsinki, checks into Hotel Torni and tells them he will stay for 5 days. On October 12th, Oswald checks out of Hotel Torni and returns to Stockholm, while the imposter checks into the Klaus Kirke Hotel. He can't check into the Torni because the staff will know he's a different person with the same name, so the imposter must check into a different hotel. The imposter explains why Oswald, supposedly, changed hotels. Now, of course, there could be another explanation. If you want the official story to be true, you can think Oswald found a cheaper deal for the last 3 days of his stay and just went to the other hotel, or maybe there's some other reason. And that would be consistent, apparently, with Oswald's character. We see him, as we see him later on back in the U.S. So you can have any explanation you want, I suppose. But what I'm saying is that this is consistent with my explanation, and so that's what I'm going to believe. And then on October 15th, it was the imposter who took the train from Helsinki to Moscow, and Oswald entered into a relationship with U.S. intelligence, I believe. Now, I got this from, I think it's a Finnish web page, and the text here, the caption here, is a translation that I did through Google Translate of the original Finnish. And anyway, on the left we have Oswald's signature at the Hotel Torni, and on the right at the Hotel Klaus whatever. And if I'm right, then these two signatures were signed by two different people. To me, it looks like they were signed by two different people. Of course, I'm not a handwriting expert, and you can still believe whatever you want to believe about that. It does look like perhaps the second one misspells Los Angeles. It does look like the second one also, it's not on this paper, it's on some other paper. Actually, that was these documents. I don't think this has to do with the hotel. I'm not sure exactly what this is here, but they're from two different dates. One is October 11th on the top, and one is October 10th on the bottom. On the top, whoever it was misspelled his middle name. He leaves an E out of Harvey. And also, he gives the date in a different format on each of these. On the top, it's 11/10, which means October 10th. Which means October 11th, and on the bottom he actually writes OCT 10, which is October 10th. So it implies that these two documents, one filled out one day after the other, were filled out by different people. Though again, you don't have to believe that if you don't want to. So while this is not proof that I am correct that an Oswald impersonator actually went to Moscow, I think it is consistent that when you consider this evidence together and you reconcile the conflicts in the evidence, it is consistent with the idea that a switch occurred in Helsinki, where the real Oswald was sent back to Stockholm, and the Oswald impersonator went on to Moscow, and that's why Aline Mosby interviewed Oswald with brown eyes, when Oswald's passport said he had gray eyes, and elsewhere he said to have blue eyes. Blue and gray can be a little difficult to distinguish, but they're easy to distinguish from brown. And Mosby spent 2 hours with him in a hotel room interviewing him. I'm sure she knew what color eyes he had. All right. I guess I'm done now.